Why are Bermuda's houses so hurricane proof? Let's find out the secrets to how they do it. David Roots TV. Greetings to all the family, love and light. We're going to talk about Bermuda's hurricane-proof houses. Okay, for those of you that don't know me, not familiar with my background, I was born in this small island that you see on the right of the screen that they call Bermuda. It's only 21 square miles in area. 1 mile wide at its widest point. It's located in the Atlantic Ocean, mid-Atlantic or North Mid-Atlantic, if you want to call it that. And as a result, the island experiences a lot of hurricanes. Okay, as a young boy, as a young adult, and even over my adult life, I've had the opportunity to live through many a hurricane, so I have first-hand knowledge of it, and as well as the rest of the local populace, and have a little picture of a hurricane on the left. And as we experience so many of these over generations and generations, the technology that has been developed on island, okay, in particular with the way that we build our living structures, is very unique and very ingenious. So this is what we're going to examine and explore today. Okay, I like to give information that gets people thinking, record information for posterity, and look at information from a different way. So this is part of that. So without further ado, let's explore Bermuda's hurricane-proof houses. Now, most people have a layman's knowledge of what a hurricane is. Some of us will be more knowledgeable than others. Okay, hurricanes are extreme weather events. They consist of very, very strong winds. Okay, high winds, and with those high winds, it can cause damage to property as well as damage to the environment. So trees can be swept down, and houses, like you can see in the picture, houses can be damaged. Okay, and depending on the robustness of the house, the way the house is built, then, or the building is built, will depend on the amount of damage that's incurred from a hurricane. Along with those high winds, you also get what's called storm surge. And as a hurricane moves with the high winds, and hurricanes, the wind goes around like that, but you know, when you're in the hurricane, the wind is basically just going in from one direction to another. You don't necessarily feel the swirl, it's just going from one direction to another. That can cause the ocean, because these hurricanes are very big, but that can cause the ocean to also move forward with those winds. And in particular during high tides, then that can create what we call a storm surge, and that storm surge can wash away and move up onto the land and cause buildings to be washed away because the foundation will be eroded, as well as obviously carry away things like vehicles and boats and push things up onto the land, and unfortunately in some cases carry away people if they get too close. The high winds also can cause flying debris or result in flying debris, which can be man-made debris such as material, just random material, wood material, roofing material, objects like rubbish tins and all sorts of things can fly around during a hurricane, as well as natural material like branches and rocks and things like that. Okay, and that can be quite dangerous. There's also the after effects of hurricanes, such as the contamination due to the spray of water, of salt water in particular. And if that salt water gets into the freshwater supplies, or pushed up due to the storm surge into the aquifers, underground aquifers, the water can become undrinkable. And obviously, if you cannot get access to fresh water after a hurricane, which normally can result in a power being out as well, that can lead to some serious health concerns. Okay, the water contamination also can result in, because you get high amounts of rain during hurricanes as well. Hurricanes pick up lots of moisture from the ocean because the air is quite warm, so that picks up lots of moisture, and that moisture can come out in the form of rain, and that rain can cause flooding, as well as the after effects once the hurricane passes can lead to high amounts of like insect populations, such as mosquitoes, harmful insects, okay, and flies, and generally things like mosquitoes, which also can spread sickness. Okay, so hurricanes can be quite dangerous. People die in hurricanes from those various factors, and fortunately in Bermuda they developed a science behind how to be at the best possible conditions during the hurricane, and part of that science is the way that we build our houses. And you can see some pictures of houses during this one on the right is during a hurricane. You can clearly see the storm surge being pushed up onto the land, and this house has been built right next to the ocean but is standing quite strong. And this house on the left hasn't fared as well. This is after a hurricane. The wall has been damaged, but you can see the majority of the house is still standing strong. So that maybe they had a weak point in that particular wall. So we're going to talk more about the science of Bermuda's hurricane proofing. But we need to do a little bit of background first and understand where did this science come from. So I've included a little article here. All the links are here and the dates if you want to look it up yourself. Okay, and I titled this The Master Masons of Bermuda. Okay, so the article says Bermuda stone has been used from the early days of settlement for building, first for forts, okay, fortifications, military fortifications, and then public buildings, okay, and later for houses. Okay, so first the stone was used for building forts, and then later for houses. All right, and then if we look down here, it says that Bermuda's first stone cutters, because to build these forts and buildings and then houses out of stone, you need to cut the stone. So Bermuda's first stone cutters were often slaves or indentured laborers. Okay, so a large part of the technology that was developed over time through those people that were doing the labor, which was the black population, the African descendant population of Bermuda, okay, who were being enslaved at the time in early Bermuda, and they would have had to use their labor and their technological know-how, not only to cut the stone, but in order to build these structures. So let's look a bit deeper at this. Okay, and here's another article that talks about the stone and how it was used for building. And it says here, it said, how did Bermuda's indigenous building style come to adopt such a high standard of wind resistance? Well, it seems to go back to a run of 4 hurricanes. One in September 1712, okay, again in 1712, the hurricane destroyed the majority of wooden buildings. So it's showing you that in the 18th century, so in the 1700s, the early 1700s, most of the buildings would have been built out of wood and not stone. And then it says then twice in 1713 and again more strongly in 1715, the hurricanes ruined the newly rebuilt churches. So a lot of these churches again would have been built out of wood, okay, Because remember it said the forts were the first things built out of stone. And it says one hurricane can seem like an exception, 4 becomes a trend. So in response, houses were then constructed with walls of massive reef limestone blocks covered by roofs tiled with thick slabs of cold stone. Okay, and so that technology of building out of stone developed from a need, because Bermuda was this first landed on, not discovered. It was discovered, seen before 1609, but it was first landed on by the English, a man named Sir George Somers, who was headed on his way over to the Americas. He got shipwrecked. Him and his compatriots got shipwrecked. That was 1609. Okay, and there were no black people there at that time. And it says here that estimates based on a sample of wills and inventories dating from 1663 to 1707 that at least 80% of white heads of household owned slaves. Okay, although they typically did so in small numbers. So originally there were no black people, and then they started to, as the population in Bermuda started to get higher, the white population, they started to bring in slaves. Okay, and it would have been these slaves that took part, as they said, in the stone cutting to build first the forts and then later the houses. Remember, we said that the houses were first built out of wood and then later on out of stone. Okay, so you can see some early forts here. This one is 1621. Now there wouldn't have been, and from my knowledge, any slaves. It would have been white people during that time, and Bermuda was first landed on 1609. So that means that the knowledge of how to build the fort out of stone, as well as how to cut the stone, would have come from those English settlers first. This is important to understand. The knowledge of how to build the forts and how to cut the stone most likely came from the English settlers first, because as it says here, the white population in Bermuda remained the majority until the 18th century. So that's the 1700s. This is 1621 and this one 1624. They already had forts then. So that means it's the English people, probably through indentured labor, that had the knowledge of how to cut the stone as well as how to build with the stone. Okay, now there's further evidence for this, because it's quite common knowledge that Europe has a long history of stone masonry, particularly in the building of churches, large churches like cathedrals, as well as forts. Okay, so here's an article about stone quarrying and masonry. It says Portland stone is one of the world's finest building materials, having been quarried from the 14th century. Okay, so we're talking about the 14th century, so that's the 1300s in England, and transported by water for use in such places as Exeter Cathedral and the Tower of London. So from very early, before even the discovery or the landing on Bermuda, the English had this skillful knowledge of stone quarrying and building with stone. Okay, and most likely they brought that to Bermuda first to build the forts and then later to build the houses. Okay, however, as it's said here, as time went on, that labor would have been done more and more so by the people that were brought in as slaves, that people of African descent, and it would have been them that developed fully the technology that we see today in terms of the Bermuda houses and how they're built out of stone, because there's a huge difference between building a structure like this and building a structure like this. This is a fortification used to protect against bombardment from cannons, whereas this is a living structure that was developed over time, in particular by the master masons of Bermuda, those people primarily of African descent. They were the ones that were working in the quarries, and as we will see, they were the ones that also developed the ingenious technologies of how to build with the unique stone that was found in Bermuda. So we're giving credit to the source of original source of the stone quarrying and stone building, but we're also paying homage to those people that would develop it further. Okay, so let's get on with the hurricane proofing science that we find in Bermuda. Now, this first piece of information is not necessarily about the structure, but it's about how the native people, okay, the indigenous people or the local people, because there was no one on Bermuda when they first landed on Bermuda, but the black people there, as well as the native white people, have become indigenous because they've been there for so long. But in particular, the maritime people in Bermuda have developed a hurricane prediction technology. So before they could even needed to proof the houses, they had a way of predicting hurricanes, okay? Using the materials, natural resources found in their environment. And in this case, what they call a shark oil barometer. Okay, a barometer is something that measures air pressure. And air pressure, even in modern meteorological sciences, is what is used to determine how the weather will be. Okay, and hurricanes, as I said, are low pressure systems, and the local people found that by using what's the oil from sharks, from shark liver, that will give an indication of the weather. Okay, and here's a diagram here with a write-up from this source here down the bottom, and you can see that it says here, as the oil, so is the sea, meaning if the oil is cloudy, then you're going to have a rough sea. Okay, and it says, as the glass, so is the sky. So here you see the glass on top, and then you have the oil down the bottom. Okay, so here is the glassy part of the shark oil, and then down the bottom you have the turbulent side. Okay, so if that part is nice and clear, that means the sky is going to be nice and clear. Okay, if the top part here is nice and clear, that means the sky is going to be nice and clear. All right, but if it becomes cloudy and turbulent, that means that you're probably going to have some rough weather. And the very skillful people, that have the knowledge that was passed down to them through oral tradition, they would know specific weather patterns from the patterns that the shark oil would demonstrate or would display inside of it. Okay, so here it says hurricanes and tornadoes would have a wind plume form at the base and spiral and thicken. Okay, and in the article it says, for 270 years Bermuda pilots and fishermen relied on shark oil for all seasons. And people would hang this up on their house. The fishermen have it on their boats or hanging up on their houses. It needs to be kept still, absolutely still, so they're hanging up on the houses. And they would use that to predict the weather, including predicting hurricanes. And some of the most skillful people were those people who were the maritime fishermen and boatsmen. And many of the master boatsmen and master fishermen were those of African descent. Okay, so we have to pay homage to them throughout this discussion, because they were the ones that developed this technology through their natural relationship with the environment. So once the hurricanes were predicted, then people still had to exist in the optimum conditions to get through the hurricanes. Okay, so we're talking about early Bermuda. How did this technology develop to survive and have housing and structure that would allow people to ride out a hurricane? There's nothing you can do in a hurricane, speaking from personal experience, except just to ride it out. So you need structures that allow you to do that. So let's look at some of those structures. I wanted to show here a very old newspaper section from a newspaper, the Royal Gazette, which is the oldest newspaper in Bermuda. And this particular passage is from 1862. Okay, so 1862. And here it says they were going to send a list of articles to the London International Exhibition. And what were they going to send? Out of all of this stuff, they were going to send 1 bottle also of shark oil. So that's how long this technology has been used. And obviously if they're sending shark oil in 1862, then it would have been around for much longer, okay, at least generations before that, for them to understand how to use it. Okay, and lots of these products, by the way, if you really take a good look at them, would have been products that our African ancestors of African descent in Bermuda would have been the chief ones to develop, like the fish pots, like the cedar tubs and the carvings that would have come from the cedar tubs, okay, things built with palmetto, all sorts of things, extraction of honey, okay. Why? Because the reality is that in Bermuda, lots of the labor during that time would have been done in the early, before emancipation, which was in 1834, would have been done by the black enslaved population. So we have to pay homage where homage is due. Okay, so let's look at the technology. Now, a big part of the technology, as we said, relates to the stone. Okay, and in this photograph, old photograph of Bermuda, black and white photograph, you can see the tradesmen, who are all black, people of African descent, building a home out of Bermuda stone. Okay, on the right is a more modern picture. They're also building a building. Okay, I don't think this is a house per se. I think it's part of it could be a house, but I think it's part of a hotel structure. But they're building this one out of block, what we call block. In the UK they call it cinder block. In Bermuda they call it breeze block. So they're building this out of block, but the early houses would have been built out of stone. Okay, so a big part of the hurricane proofing is, as I say here, having strong foundation equals strong houses. Not just the foundation that the house sits on, but just the foundation of the house, meaning it's built out of strong material. Okay, and this stone here is taken directly from quarries, like you see here, the limestone here. Okay, and it's quite heavy, the stone, and they would build the whole house out of this material. So obviously if you have high winds, the stone has lots of inertia. It's not going to move much. It's going to take a lot for it to move, and that's going to allow the house to be very, very strong. And you can see here they're putting in a window frame, and they're going to build the stone around the window, the window frame, and that would have allowed the houses to be quite strong. Okay. Another huge part of the hurricane proofing technology is what we call in the building sciences, a foundation. So you can see here they're building with the block, but that block is built on what's called the foundation. Okay, and here they've dug a channel into the dirt, and that channel is going to be at least a foot deep, and they've now poured concrete inside that channel. Okay, here, and they're also going to have sometimes they will have iron rods in that foundation to make it even stronger, and that's what they're going to build off of. That's going to be the foundation to build the house off of. Okay, and also you can see that that foundation is recessed, so it's dropped in the earth. So any high winds are not going to move these Bermuda houses, okay, because they're anchored to the earth. Okay, and that's the science. The houses are anchored to the earth. So that's the first proofing science, that the housing is anchored to the earth and is made out of the earth. so it becomes one with the earth. And so in the ingenuity of these craftsmen, is that they have used the earth itself and anchored the houses to the earth, which have allowed them to be very robust during hurricanes. So that's the first hurricane proofing technology that we want to look at. The second part is the way that they design the roofs. Okay, so you can see back to this picture here, we have the stone blocks are being used to build the walls of the house, but the same limestone material is now also being used to roof the house, and you can see it here lined up as slate. So this house is under construction, this house is practically complete, and they're going to use the slate, and you can see it in the foreground here, to cover the timber on the roof. And here's a close-up of how it's done. So you can see the craftsman here, he's working here, and he has the slate in his hand, and he's laying the slate down on other slate, a bed of other slate, working his way up the roof. Okay, and he's using some mortar, some cement, okay, here, to allow the slate to stick to each other, as well as to cover the joints of the slate, so that they are basically stuck together and form one basically roof material. Okay, and you can see a close-up here of how it's done. So here you have the slate, and this particular diagram is how they're using new materials to copy the technology, but it shows the way that it is done, where you have the slate being put from the bottom going up, and as you go up, each slate lies on top of the other one. So it's like that, and then you put another one like that, and that allows gravity to push down onto the roof and allows it to not move. Okay, not move. So it's a very, very strong structure. Having the slate on the roof is very, very heavy. Okay, and that's the second piece of technology that allows these Bermuda houses to be so robust. In other parts of the Caribbean, as well as in Florida and places in America that get hurricanes, the houses are not very robust. So when hurricanes come, especially in the Caribbean, many houses are built with zinc roofs, and in the Americas, they're built with other sorts of material, like slate, as clay slate, but trying to think of what they're built with, but it's too light and it will be blown off by the hurricane. Whereas in Bermuda, they build it with the slate, okay, and that slate is very heavy, and that's part of the technology that is used to hurricane proof the houses. Now, as the populations become more dense, they're trying to find other materials to replace the slate, because the slate is becoming increasingly rare, the limestone slate, and that's what you can see here. They're talking about cement boards, so they're making boards out of the cement rather than out of the slate. So it's a similar type of material, but it's made artificially rather than making this one from the natural limestone rock. Okay, so that's the second part. Let's move on. Now, the fact that we have this slating technology in Bermuda, we need to say that you'll find similar technology in other places. But the Bermuda one is quite unique because of how they use the mortar as an adhesive. And this mortar is made from the same material as the limestone slate, as well as the stone. Okay, so again, what they do is they take the limestone, they crush it up into sand, they heat it, okay, to make what's called slate lime, and from that you can make mortar. all right, and they use that mortar, that cementing material, to allow the slate to stick to each other. So effectively, when you have the foundation of the house built from stone and in the stone, and then you have the house itself built out of stone, and then you have the roof built out of stone and then stuck to each other with that same stone, the whole house becomes this unit of stone tied into the earth. That's unlike the UK, where you'll see the use of clay slate, and what they will use here, they will use nails to keep the slate stuck to each other. They use the same system of starting from the bottom and moving the slate on top of each other, okay, and that allows gravity to hold it down. But the adhesive fixture is different. In the UK, they will use a nail, okay, at the top of the slate. You can't see the nail because it's underneath the slate here and underneath here, okay. But in Bermuda, they're going to use the limestone material, okay, to stick it in. So that's another aspect of our hurricane proofing, the use of this indigenous adhesive chemical system. All right, and the reason that we need to recognize it might seem like, oh, well, they're just using, the mortar. The people had to come up with this technology, okay, and develop it over time, develop the ratios, the proportions, the formulations, so that it was passed on from generation to generation to now the exact science that we have today. And it needs to be recognized how powerful that technology is. Okay, good. Another aspect of Bermuda's hurricane proofing system, okay, hurricane proof houses, is the venting system. Now, as I said, hurricanes are systems of low pressure, okay? So that means that there's a lot of suction going up with the air. The air pressure can be quite low, and the lower the air pressure, the more powerful the hurricane, because what happens is you have the eye of the hurricane, okay? And at the eye wall is where the pressure is the lowest, and everything else is getting sucked in like that, okay? Getting sucked in. Okay, so the pressure is quite low, and this sucking phenomenon can cause, here you can see the roof of this house has lost a lot of tile, and even this part of the wall, this is probably from that low pressure pulling up, okay, and it can also push off. Because this, depending on the rate of suction goes, it can cause things to push out, okay? So the fact that this roof here and this wall has come off on this side probably suggests that the design of this wall and the house wasn't done necessarily correctly. So if we look now to this small system, this venting system plays a huge role in making sure that our roofs and our other components of the home stay intact. Okay, now why? Wow. The first thing we need to notice is that there's a chimney on this roof. Okay, and many of the modern houses are not being built with chimneys. Okay, as well as they have this vent system. Now what that does is it allows the air pressure to equalize effectively during a hurricane. So as the pressure gets lower and causes a suction effect on the components of the house, which can cause windows to be pushed out or sucked in. All right, doors can go like that during a hurricane due to that low pressure system. This vent allows the house's interior, specifically in the roof, inside the roof area, to equalize, okay, and neutralizes that displacement and unequal air pressure. Okay, it's the same thing for the chimney system, okay, which this tends to connect to the loft of the house, whereas the chimney goes right down into the interior of the house. So as the system, the weather system goes across, you're going to get this upward movement of air, and that again, I said, can cause a huge suction. So this vent is there to allow the equalizing of pressure. Okay, it has some other important functions too, in the fact that Bermuda can be quite humid. So this allows the houses to not build up with moisture, so the air can pass through the houses. But it also plays a very important role during hurricanes. Now, this venting technology is complemented by the know-how of the locals. Okay, and this is a perfect example because you can see this house doesn't have a chimney on it. There's no fireplace in this house. So as the materials of our homes get more robust, so you can see here, this is a door probably made out of metal or PVC. Okay, the windows will be made out of metal and PVC, okay, to insulate, and the houses are made out of blocks. So this house will be quite sealed up during a hurricane if everyone was to close all the windows and bunker right down. And what that would do is that would cause a huge buildup of air pressure. So you can see here the arrows I put in reflect the pressure, the low pressure system traveling across. Okay, so if a hurricane was coming from this direction and there is lots of wind blowing that way, and you also have the air pressure going up, what that can do is it can blow out windows because the low pressure is pulling up like this. Okay, and it can cause the windows to blow out. Okay, and sometimes the reverse can happen, where it can cause the window, like this one on this side, to blow in. So this side would blow out and this side would blow in. All right, especially if the houses are all sealed up. So what people have learned to do is that they need to keep at least one window open, not fully open, but just a crack in the window, okay, on both sides, and that allows the pressure to equalize through the home. Okay, especially if it has that chimney on as well. All right, so I'm calling this hurricane techno behavior, okay, because it's a technical understanding. It's not in the structure of the house, but it's the behavior of the people. And many people will have damage to the houses if they're not aware of that, not aware of how to adjust the pressure in the house and accommodate for it using their windows. Okay, so this isn't taught to people in school and university. This comes through the oral tradition and the oral passing down of the science through generation to generation. Okay, now this technology is found in many parts of the world. Okay, the technology of blinds, what we call blinds and shutters. Different people call them different things. But in Bermuda, we have learned to use this technology in order to benefit us in regards to hurricanes. Okay, how? Well, first of all, during hurricanes you have high winds and you have lots of rain, so you want to be able to close your windows, or you want to be able to keep the rain and the wind out. But as I said, you need to keep the windows slightly open during those times in order to make sure the pressure is equalized. So how can you do both? Well, by using these blinds and shutters. Okay, this is more of the style that would have been in the early houses, and later on people have moved to this style of blinds, but they have these slats in them, and the slats allow airflow. So when the hurricane comes, you can close the shutter just like this, close the blinds, close these shutters, but the rain and the wind cannot get inside because the slats are designed so that they are overlapping. So the rain will hit and just come off of the slats, but the wind can still pass through and allow the homes to be equalized. Okay, so this is a really like benign looking feature of a Bermuda home, but it's really powerful because one, it will protect the residents inside the home from the wind, protects the property inside the home from the rain, but also allows the equalization of the air even while doing that. And that way it will protect the home and keep it from being further damaged. Because if you have too much pressure, it can actually lift off the slate, because I said the slate was attached to each other. It can lift off the slate in one go. Okay, so having this equalization technology is very important. And of course, these things would have been made out of wood originally, and you would have had the craftsmen who were very skilled to be able to design these so that they are overlapping, and had to develop that technology over time. And we have to acknowledge that. So I talked about earlier how during hurricanes you can have issues regarding contamination of water. One unique thing about Bermuda and Bermuda homes is that Bermuda is a place that doesn't have any huge surface freshwater resources. There are no lakes, and the lakes that are there, what we call lakes, are actually brackish water areas that have saltwater intrusion. Okay, so how do we get our water? Well, you can get your water from wells, okay, in the aquifers, but they can be quite brackish also. So the majority of water is actually gotten from the rain. And you can see here a structure being built. I think this is for a hotel. But nevertheless, it's similar for the way that the houses are built. And what they've done is they've used the block and they've built what we call a water tank. So this tank will be underneath the ground, okay? And it's going to be very, very large. And when it rains, the roofs of the houses, so you can see here on the side, this is an old Bermuda cottage. And you can see this one has a more of an older version, a surface water tank. But the piping is coming from the roofs, and the water will be directed into the tank, and that's where it's going to be stored. Same here, eventually you have a structure built on top of this, and the roofs will catch that water and will store it down in the water tanks here. And you can already see some of the piping that the water is going to come down and be put into the water tank. So why is this important? Well, we said that the water can be contaminated, okay, during especially the aquifer can be contaminated during the storms. And if it's contaminated, that means that it's undrinkable. So during the hurricanes, what Bermudians, the advantage that they have is that they have a in location water storage unit where they can access water from. They don't need electricity because the electricity can get knocked out during hurricanes. They have this water tank right on their property that they can access water from, even if it means what we call dipping, which is taking a bucket and dipping it out of the tank, but you still have this fresh water resource. Okay, and if I can just go back for a minute to here, you'll see on this roof a gutter system. It's a bit hard to see because the roof is white, but you see a gutter system with a little hole in it, and that will be where the water is collected down on the roof. So what Bermudians do during a hurricane, before the hurricane comes, they will close that guttering system off. So they already have the water stored underneath the house, but they'll close the guttering system off so that no leaves and no saltwater spray can get into that tank. And that means that after the hurricane goes and the water might not be running in the pipes, or you might not be able to get water from anywhere else, they have a ready-made water system. And it's this issue of fresh water that actually has affected lots of people where hurricanes have hit outside of Bermuda, including developed places like the Americas, like in Florida, like in Louisiana, where people couldn't get fresh water, like in some of the sister islands down to the south of Bermuda, where they don't have this technology of water storage. Okay, and it's been around a long time. So as you can see here, you have an old Bermuda cottage with the same water storage. This one happens to be partially on the surface, but the more modern houses have the large water tanks underneath it. And so that technology again is unique to Bermuda and developed in Bermuda, and many places are starting to try to adopt that outside of Bermuda. And we have to pay homage to the master masons who have the skills and the know-how and develop that technology over time to allow Bermudians, people of Bermuda, to deal with the extremely serious events of hurricanes. So that was my quick video on Bermuda's hurricane-proof houses and the science and the technology that was put into it. We need to get this information recorded, okay, and talk about this information so that, one, the future generations have an understanding of how powerful their ancestors were and how they took information from other places, oftentimes under force. They were forced to take in this information, and they developed it over time to something that was unique and something that was extremely powerful and extremely high-minded. Okay, things that often look to be very simple actually have a very high technological purpose behind them, and we want to celebrate those people, in particular in the case of Bermuda, those people of African descent, those master masons, those master technologists that would have been the people working hard in the quarries, they're working hard as the stone masons, developing all of these systems without the use of modern technology. My name is David Roots. I wish you peace, wish you love. Give thanks.